Hey everybody, hope you are doing well. Welcome to this episode of The Sharpening Report. If you're new here and you haven't had a chance, please subscribe to this channel. It's the best way to support this YouTube channel. And let's just get right into today's topic. Also, when you do subscribe, make sure you click the bell to turn on all notifications. And if you think you're subscribed, but you haven't seen my stuff come up lately, YouTube might have unsubscribed you. It's been doing that a lot lately. So just click the bell again and just make sure you have all notifications turned on. Okay, so in our world of three spatial dimensions, we tend to classify things by their outward appearance. We sort things out in accordance to size, shape, color, a variety of other physical attributes. And that works out great for objects that are physical. But it doesn't seem to work out as well with things outside of our three dimensions of space. So the cherubim are true extra-dimensional entities. They vary in appearance, yet they are known as cherubim based on their purpose, their reason for existence. The job of cherubim seems to be protection in various forms. And we see this aspect in the religious beliefs and even the myths of various cultures. We see these same kinds of beings show up. And descriptions of the cherubim's appearance varies depending on culture, time period, and who's providing the description. But the common thread as far as appearance is they all seem to be an amalgamation of various types of animal and human forms. And this aspect of the cherubim is repeated throughout all accounts, though the specifics seem to vary. So the first mention we see of cherubim in Jewish scripture is found in the book of Genesis. After Adam and Eve had rebelled, God expelled them from the Garden of Eden, and after that, he placed cherubim in the garden to protect the tree of life. Genesis 3:24 says, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every which way to keep the way of the tree of life." Now, an interesting thing to note, which might describe an attribute of the Garden of Eden, can be found when we consider the word east, where it says that, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden. Now, in the original text, the word east comes from the Hebrew word kedem and has a double meaning. Most times it simply just means east, but and on the surface that seems to be the appropriate translation, but kedem can also mean ancient, aforetime, earliest time, and beginning, among others. The word kedem is used to describe an attribute of God in other places of the scripture. So Deuteronomy 33:27 says, "The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms, and he shall thrust out the enemy from before thee, and shall say, destroy them." So in this verse, the word eternal, the eternal God is thy refuge. That word eternal was translated from the Hebrew word kedem. So this shows the timeless attribute of God. And describing God as eternal conveys the idea that he is outside of time itself. He has no beginning or end. So this might actually help explain an aspect of creation that's not commonly considered. So earlier in the book of Genesis, we read about the attributes of the Garden of Eden. Genesis 2:8 says, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." Well, the word planted comes from the Hebrew word nata, which also means established. And since the word eastward comes from kedem, this could be conveying the idea that the garden itself was originally established in a place outside of time as we know it. And the fact that the garden had a beginning disqualifies it from being truly eternal, but this could be showing that it originated from a state outside of the normal flow of time. And this could be an attempt to describe a place of a different space-time than we are familiar with. So the Garden of Eden might have originated possibly from a higher dimension. And if this is true, this could help explain further why Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. There's a theory that states before Adam and Eve fell that they had access to all dimensions of created space-time. And at the time of the rebellion, a split in the dimensions occurred. Then Adam and Eve are left fallen to the third dimensions of space and one of time that we are currently familiar with, and the rest of the higher dimensions became inaccessible. And perhaps this was the purpose of the fruit of the tree of life, at least one of them. So before the fall, Adam and Eve were free to eat of any tree except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we get that from Genesis 2:16 through 17. So this means that they were free to eat from the tree of life since it was already present in the garden, Genesis 2:9. If the fruit from the tree of life was there to sustain their state in eternity, then we can begin to understand why Adam and Eve were denied access after they fell. Adam was told if he were to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he would surely die, Genesis 2:17. If Adam and Eve were to eat the the fruit from the tree of life after they fell, it seems like they would have been in the eternal state of death. It would have locked them into that. They would have been comparable to the unredeemable serpent who first tempted them into rebellion. They would have had no chance of redemption. So after all of this, Genesis 3:24 tells us that cherubim guarded the garden along with a flaming sword which turned every which way to keep the way of the tree of life. Note that the text does not necessarily imply the cherubim were handling the sword. The text only states that one was placed there. The turning every way aspect seemed to come directly from the sword itself and does not seem to be caused by the cherubim. So it seems whatever the sword actually was, its purpose was to make it impossible for Adam and Eve to enter the garden again and have access to the tree of life. And this sword may have been what was used to cause the split in dimensions of space-time. It was not until after Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden that this sword was set in place. So if true, then this would help explain why the Garden of Eden has never been found. It exists in a state that we no longer have access to for very good reason. It's contained in a dimension higher than our own, possibly. And it could very well be that the garden is still here on Earth, but due to our limited perception, we could walk right through it and never know it. And to this day, it's possible the sword and the cherubim are still performing their duty, thus the garden remains inaccessible. And before I continue, I want to make mention, too, there are a lot of people that take the Adam and Eve stuff, in my opinion, way too far. Almost to the point that where Adam and Eve are like superheroes before they fell, like they could do all this amazing superhuman things, like, who knows, fly or whatever. And I just want to make mention, I don't believe that that's true because Jesus himself was fully man, fully God, right? But he had to represent humanity in order to die for humanity. And yeah, Jesus could perform miracles and stuff, but I think that is in terms of his fully God aspect. But his fully man aspect was very similar to us. And if he was representing all mankind, and if Adam and Eve had all these superpowers, I just don't see how that meshes. Hey everyone, concerning the economically unstable times that we live in, it is a great idea to convert some of your savings into real money. Now, there is a big difference between real money and what we call money, which is actually currency. So our dollar is currency, which fluctuates. Real money, like silver, is a store of value over time. The best way to think of it is like this. If you had saved $1,000 in cash back in the late 60s, the late 1960s, that $1,000 would still be $1,000 today, but it would buy you significantly less today due to inflation. Now, if you saved that same $1,000 in silver back in the 1960s, it would be around $28,000 today. So one of the best ways to protect your purchasing power is in real money, more specifically, silver. Now, you can buy and have the metal shipped discreetly to your door, and what most people don't know is that you can actually convert your IRA or even your 401k into physical silver rather than having all your life savings tied up in the paper fiat system, which is, of course, subject to hyperinflation. So go to dailyrenegade.com right now and click on the Cornerstone Asset Metals banner and sign up to get your free silver report. One of the financial experts will speak with you and find out the best way to protect protect your savings going forward in these uncertain times. You can also click on the link in the description below that goes directly to cornerstoneassetmetals.com. Make sure you tell them that Josh Peck at Daily Renegade sent you. It is time to stop trusting the evil beast financial system of the world and protect your assets today. I think Adam and Eve were human, and they probably had a lot of improvements that we do today from what we do today because just of genetic degradation throughout however many years and generations and all that. You know, we're a little weaker, a little slower than they probably were. But I think the essential components of being a human were there even before the fall. So, you know, in terms of the extra dimensionality of things, I don't know. It's a guess, but I would say, you know, be careful with that because there's a lot of people in New Age that'll take that way too far, and they'll say that Adam and Eve were basically these superhumans that would be unrecognizable to what humanity is today, and then they'll say like they were psychic and stuff, and you can have access to these psychic gifts too. You just have to tap into that. We've lost it over time. There's really nothing to suggest that. So I want to be careful when I'm talking about extra dimensions. I'm talking about locations. I'm not really talking about necessarily the capabilities of Adam and Eve as human beings. I'm just talking about locations here. So I just want to make that distinction. So if you do your own research on that, be very careful where your source is and where things are coming from, because the New Age loves this stuff, and they love to take this all the way up to 11 and make it into something that's just not reflected in the text. So now let's talk about the Ark and the Temple. Now, I want to make mention too, real quick. If you're interested in this kind of topic, all of this comes from my book, Cherubim Chariots, which is available right now at prophecywatchers.com. Now, although we don't get much of a visual description of the cherubim in Genesis, we begin to get more details as we move through Jewish scriptures. So in the book of Exodus, we find an exact depiction of the Ark of the Covenant, the place where God would descend and fellowship with mankind. So atop the Ark of the Covenant were two cherubim made of gold. The construction of the Ark and the cherubim are detailed for us in Scripture. And thou shalt make two cherubims of gold, of beaten work thou shalt make them, in the two ends of the mercy seat, and make one cherub on the one end and the other cherub on the other end. Even of the mercy seat ye shall make the cherubims on the two ends thereof. And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings. And their faces shall look one to another toward the mercy seat, shall the faces of the cherubim be. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. And that is Exodus 25:18 through 22. So from that text, we learn that the cherubim have wings and faces. We also get a similar detail when the temple is described in the book of 1 Kings. And within the oracle, he made two cherubims of olive tree, each 10 cubits high, and 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherubim, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub, from the uttermost part of the one wing unto the uttermost part of the other were 10 cubits. And the other cherubim was 10 cubits. Both the cherubims were of one measure and one size. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was it of the other cherub. And he set the cherubims within the inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubims, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the midst of the house, and he overlaid the cherubims with gold. 1 Kings 6:23 through 28. So the Jewish historian Josephus stated that based on the available descriptions of the temple, no one can know or even guess the true form that the cherubim took. So this is from Flavius Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 8:3:3. He also dedicated for the most secret place, whose breadth was whose breadth was 20 cubits and length the same, 2 cherubims of solid gold. The height of each of them was 5 cubits. They had each of them 2 wings stretched out as far as 5 cubits, wherefore Solomon set them up not that far from each other, that with one wing they might touch the southern wall of the secret place, and with another, the northern, their other wings, which joined to each other, were a covering to the ark, which was set between them, but nobody can tell or even conjecture what was the shape of these cherubims, end quote. Now we actually find even more detailed visual descriptions of cherubim in other ancient texts, like the book of Ezekiel, but that's a long, exhaustive study, so maybe we'll save that for a different video. But we can go into other equivalents of these creatures. So let's talk about the Lamasu and the Shadu. So the Lamasu is the Assyrian equivalent to the cherubim. It was considered a protective deity that had the winged body of a lion or a bull with a human head. And the Lamasu is portrayed as a female deity in writing. The male counterpart to the Lamasu is known as the Shadu, though these are depicted less frequently. So the amalgamation of animals and human, along with the protective nature of the creature, shows a clear connection between the Lamasu and the cherubim of Jewish scripture. And a lot of that animal stuff we get from Ezekiel, but basically the Lamasu and the Shadu, they had human heads and animal bodies, like the bodies of lions with wings, but they had human heads. When you read through the book of Ezekiel in the first chapter, the description of the cherubim that we get are opposite. They're humanoid bodies, but then they have animal heads. So it's like the reverse. And you know, this is what Satan does. Satan will always take things from God and twist and make his own thing out of it. And I think that's what we're seeing here with the Lamasu and Shadu, compared against the actual real cherubim. So in the British Museum, an excavated Lamasu can be found on display, and this comes from northern Iraq, specifically from the palace of King Ashur-nasir-pal II, who ruled between 883 and 859 BC in ancient Assyria. And during his reign, he turned the once provincial town of Nimrud, ancient Kalu, into the capital city. And in the city, the place, his palace, is described in many of the reliefs as contained what is known as the standard inscription. This inscription is important because it tells the purpose of the Lamasu. So the inscription states, quote, "I built thereon a palace with halls of cedar, cypress, juniper, boxwood, teak, terebinth, and tamarisk as my royal dwelling, and for the enduring leisure life of my lordship, beasts of the mountains and the seas, which I had fashioned out of white limestone and alabaster, I set up in its gates. I made it the palace fittingly imposing." End quote. So it's said that the beasts of the mountains and seas were the Lamasu themselves, as they were sculpted from limestone. So the purpose of these beasts was to guard, protect, and support important doorways in Assyrian palaces. And the sculptor gave the Lamasu 5 legs, so that it would that from the front it would appear to be standing firmly, while from the side it would be appear to be striding forward. And I think that that's interesting that it says the beasts of the mountains and seas, that's what the Lamasu were. So it makes me wonder, did these people actually see these things from time to time? I mean, when you read some of these ancient texts, seems like they did. But again, it would be my opinion that these would be agents of Satan rather than the actual holy cherubim from God. You know, no one gets into full-time ministry to make money. At least no one should. Given that, Daily Renegade accepts donations from those who care to help keep us going. Now, because Daily Renegade does not want to be told by the government what we can and can't say, we're not 501c3, so your donations are not tax deductible, but that's not why you're giving anyway, to get something back for yourself. Speaking of which, we here are never going to promise that if you donate, God will reward you with even more financial success. We're not about making promises for God here. But what I can promise is your donations are very much appreciated appreciated and help the continuation of everything we do here at Daily Renegade to reach the world with the truth of the Bible. Also, as many of you know, my son Nathan has had some very serious medical issues that we are treating with good, all-natural and holistic remedies. But of course, those are very expensive and are not covered by insurance, so your donations help go towards his health care as well. If you can't afford to donate, you can always donate your time in prayer, which is far more valuable anyway, let's be serious. So pray for our wisdom, pray for God's guidance for us, and that we never lose focus on what's really important, which is using Daily Renegade as a light of truth that the world so desperately needs right now, especially in these times. As always, thank you so much for your generosity, and I pray God blesses you greatly. Now, in his book, Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth, The Awakened Ones, The Hidden Destiny of America, and the Day After Tomorrow, author and biblical researcher Mark A. Flynn puts forth a really interesting idea concerning the meaning of pillars in architecture. So to quote Mark Flynn from his book, he says, quote, "A wedge or obstruction was set in place at the time when the union of God and men, heaven and earth, was interrupted. An appropriate illustration for this new state would be the symbol of the pillars. The most rigid and graceful of architectural edifices were set in place after Eden and now symbolically separate heaven from earth. They were partly removed at the reconciliation between God and man that occurred through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Pillars that represent the physical separation of heaven and earth still exist," end quote. So if this interpretation of pillars is correct, we could see a possible connection when we look at the meanings of certain numbers. So E.W. Bullinger did extensive research into the meanings of numbers found in the Bible. And though the entire body of text he put together is an interesting read, for our purposes, we only need to examine 3 of those numbers. So according to Bullinger, the number 2 signifies division. 4 signifies creation, specifically material and physical, such as the earth. And 6 is described below. Quote, "6 is either 4 plus 2, i.e. man's world, 4, with man's enmity to God, 2, brought in, or it is 5 plus 1, the grace of God made of none effect by man's addition to it, or perversion or corruption of it, or it is 7 minus 1, i.e. man's coming short of physical or spiritual perfection. In any case, therefore, it has to do with man. It is the number of imperfection, the human number, the number of man as destitute of God, without Christ," end quote. When we consider the meanings of the pillars and numbers in reference to the Lamasu, we can make a connection. So remember that each Lamasu, you had one on each side, and then there were 5 legs each. So if we think of the legs of the Lamasu as sets of pillars, we find that there are a total of 5 sets in the legs alone, because 5 times 2. So you have 5 sets. And this includes combining that 5th leg of each to make one set. And, as we learned earlier, the Lamasu and Shadu were on either side of the palace doors to support a set of pillars. So including this set, we come to a total of 6 sets of pillars found within these cherubim-like creatures. So this shows the division of heaven and earth, 2 plus 4, due to man's defiance towards God, 6. And this ties back to the original purpose of the cherubim in the Garden of Eden. Though this might be speculative, it supports the idea that other ancient cultures understood the importance and the purpose of the cherubim, even though, they were being lied to by Satan, and that's why we have all these false religions. So the main reason given for the similarities found in these creatures is that ancient writers and sculptors borrowed ideas from neighboring cultures. And that's a possibility, but it doesn't explain the vast differences in deities, beliefs, and religious practices that have been documented. Most notably, the Hebrew people of ancient Israel believed in one true creator God, whereas the neighboring cultures had more pantheistic beliefs. Now, it's not a popular theory, but the possibility that ancient cultures actually witnessed these things firsthand could also explain these similarities. When considering the possibility of dimensions higher than our own, it's entirely possible that ancient cultures had encounters with extra-dimensional beings such as these. And this is what many of them had reported in their writings, and like on the Jewish side, just like the books of Genesis and Ezekiel. So if we take them at their word, humanity has been visited in the past by beings outside of our current understanding of reality. So that begs the question, and I do talk about this more in the book, is that are these encounters, are they still happening today? Which is an interesting thought. And again, if you're interested in this topic, all of this comes from my book, Cherubim Chariots, which you can find at prophecywatchers.com. So the account that we find in the 6th chapter of Genesis, along with other Jewish sources, is probably the most fascinating account of humans interacting with extra-dimensional beings that we have available today. So Genesis 6 tells us how the fallen angels descended to procreate with mankind. The offspring created from this forbidden union are known as the Nephilim. The non-canonical book of Enoch gives us even more detail concerning the fallen angels known as Watchers and their rebellion against Yahweh. So along with their genetic material, we read that the Watchers actually brought other supposed gifts to mankind, technological knowledge. So chapter 7 of the book of Enoch begins to describe what type of knowledge the Watchers brought with them from heaven. Quote, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants, end quote. Now, the knowledge of roots and plants is important, but for now, the description of the knowledge handed down from the Watchers is continued in chapter 8. And I think probably that plants thing has to do with hallucinogenics. Even a lot of cultures today use them to commune with their gods, and that's all fallen angel stuff. But continued on in chapter 8. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armoros, the resolving of enchantments. Barakayal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel, the signs of the earth. Shamziel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the course of the moon. So, as we compare the biblical book of Genesis with this non-canonical book of Enoch, we find that these events would have occurred just prior to the flood. And concerning the flood, we can find a very interesting account that might help provide a different perspective on how some of these secrets survived. So the Jewish historian Josephus, once again, writes, quote, they, the children of Seth, also were the inventors of that peculiar sort of wisdom which is concerned with the heavenly bodies and their order, and that their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire and at another time by the violence and quantity of water. They made 2 pillars, the one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, that in case the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain, and exhibit those discoveries to mankind, and also inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Siradad, i.e. Egypt, to this day. I have just started a Substack. What is a Substack, you might ask? It is a place that contains early access to audio-only podcast versions of full Daily Renegade videos, plus my personal blog, which includes original articles, show notes, interview transcripts, and so much more. This is the only place to get this amazing resource, and it is not available to the general public. Adding a subscription to my Substack to your Daily Renegade membership will ensure that you have full access to every format of every everything that I do. So head on over to joshpeck.substack.com or click on the link in the description below to join up now for only $5 a month or $50 a year. And if you can do it, I suggest doing the $50 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free. So I cannot wait to see you there. Take care and God bless. Interesting. Egypt. So the ancient non-canonical book of Jubilees continues this story. And he, Canaan, found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock. And he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it and sinned owing to it, for it contained the teaching of the watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and moon and stars in all the signs of heaven. End quote. So if all these accounts are to be taken as factual, it might help fill in some blanks and answers to some very interesting questions. Was there a type of technology in the antediluvian world? And if so, where did it come from? Did it survive the worldwide flood? Well, this is where we have to talk about the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid and the possible connections to what we've talked about already. So, according to the account of Josephus in the Book of Jubilees, there is not much information given about the pillars of the children of Seth. We're told that there were 2 pillars, one of brick and one of stone. They were not sure if the pillar of brick would be destroyed by the flood, so in case it was, they built the pillar of stone and inscribed their discoveries on both. We're told that at least the pillar of stone remained in Egypt, at least in the days of Josephus, and that was 37 to 100 AD. We're also told that these pillars contained the teachings of the Watchers, and it was considered sinful to follow these teachings. So this begs the question, is there anything in Egypt today that may point to more answers concerning these pillars? Now, what I'm going to present here is speculative, but it's really interesting and might provide some clues to our ancient past. There's a possibility that the 2 pillars could actually be the Great Pyramid and what is now the Great Sphinx in Egypt. So author and researcher Robert M. Schoch has postulated, due to the evidence of water erosion, that the Great Sphinx of Giza is far older than most suspect, and that a catastrophe of some kind destroyed any other evidence of an older civilization. Schoch's research was showcased in the 1993 documentary Mystery of the Sphinx. That was actually presented by Charlton Heston. In Mystery of the Sphinx, the idea is put forth that the Sphinx was originally nothing more than a large natural stone jutting from the earth. An unknown civilization saw the stone and decided to carve into it, yet what they carved originally is also unknown. After the unknown civilization was destroyed, a new civilization arrived and carved the stone into the figure of a head. Also, the body was dug out and formed from the ground underneath. Thus, the Sphinx we see today was created. So if there's any validity to this idea, it might help explain the pillar of stone that contained the teachings of the Watchers. It's possible the stone that was found originally was inscribed with these teachings. Then the flood came. Later, civilizations then, for reasons unknown, maybe due to the actions of Canaan, removed the inscriptions by carving the stone down to the image of a head, and they may have created the body to form a complete cherub-like statue in order to protect something. And this could be the pillar of stone. And that original head might not even be the head that we see today. It could have been a totally different head. Maybe it had a much larger head, and then a later civilization, the Egyptians, came and formed it even more, which is why the head looks so small compared to the large body. So that brings us to the pillar of brick, and that could have been the Great Pyramid, specifically the missing capstone. There's certainly a lot of information and speculation that can be looked at in regards to the Great Pyramid, but for our purposes here, we can just look at the theory that the Great Pyramid could be made of brick, and if the builders were unsure if it would survive the flood, it might make sense that they would inscribe the teachings of the Watchers at the very top, the capstone, which is now missing. And I want to mention, too, that stating that the Great Pyramid is made from formed brick and not quarried stone is obviously controversial. But there's an interesting post concerning this from io9.com. It's what are the Great Pyramids really made of? So there's different ways to look at it. But what exactly happened to the capstone? Why is it missing today? And if it is still in existence somewhere, that's up for debate. Now, of course, when talking about these possibilities, there's many theories, each one more speculative than the last, but I do believe that truth can be found somewhere between all these theories. At the very least, it's a really interesting subject. There's a wide variety of reasons, of resources available to those who are interested in this topic. For more information about the biblical connection to the mysteries of the Great Pyramid, I highly recommend the book, The Great Pyramid, Prophecy in Stone by Noah Hutchings. Now, there might have even been Nephilim technology found after the flood in Israel. I want to talk about Nephilim grapes. That's right. There's very large grapes, and let's see why these grapes might have been so large, what that might have meant in terms of ancient technology, and even possibly the state of the earth before the flood, which is really interesting. We're going to get into some canopy theory stuff here. For my book, Cherubim Chariots, when he was still alive, I did a written interview with Chris Putnam, where I emailed him some questions about ancient technology, and he wrote them back and sent back the questions. So it wasn't an audio interview; it was written, and we'll have to get into that too, along in the section of the grapes and the canopy theory and stuff. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the first half of this episode of the Sharpening Report. You know, if you are a Bible-believing Christian who opposes the kingdom of darkness trying to run the world right now, then you are a renegade to the satanic system. We here at Daily Renegade wear that badge proudly. So, if you're a renegade as well, and you want to see the rest of this video, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now and get a membership today. Not only will you get the rest of this video, but you'll get our full catalog of Sharpening Report episodes and Daily Renegade update videos on topics such as Bible prophecy, science, technology, the Nephilim, aliens, and so much more. All of our episodes at Daily Renegade are early access, so as a member, you'll get the videos before anyone else does. Daily Renegade also offers videos not available anywhere else due to social media censorship. We also have a community page only for members where we can all fellowship together without fear of censorship. It's basically the best of Facebook and YouTube rolled into one without any of the garbage. Memberships are only $10 a month or $100 a year, and if you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run, and essentially you get 2 months for free that way. So come join our family of renegades at dailyrenegade.com right now. The link is in the description below, and we'll see you there.